So what is it that makes horror games work? Is it the monsters? Or the jump scares? Or maybe the atmosphere? Well, this may come as a surprise, but it's often the game part of the horror game that makes it work. Horror works when there's something wrong, when there's something out to get you and you don't know if you're prepared to deal with it. There's a threat and you're not in control. But what would happen if you could control the threat? Is something still scary if you fully understand it? Could you turn horror into a puzzle? And if you did, is it still a horror? So today's game is called ZENOMATRIX. This is made by Purple Moth. There's a link for it in the description, by the way, if you want to try it out. Generally, when you're playing a horror game, you're trying to keep away from the monster, right? If you think about Amnesia or something like that, you're trying to get away, you're trying to be safe. But in this game, you're trying to put yourself in danger, but strategically, something I've never seen before. To try to kind of understand how this game works, when you're playing a game, the mechanic is the thing that you're doing to make the game do something. In Minecraft, it could be moving, mining. In Roblox, it could be moving, jumping, and then interacting. In this game, the main mechanic in here is walking and looking. If you've not played a game that has what we call a weeping angel mechanic, what that is from, I believe it's from Doctor Who. When you look away from the weeping angel statue, then it moves, and then you look back and it freezes, right? That kind of thing. That kind of thing has been in a lot of horror games before, but this one, you're using it as a puzzle type of thing. So the main thing that you're doing in this game is you're going from point A to point B inside of a room, right? You have a room, you have an exit, and you're trying to get to that exit. And you're trying to get to the exit by hitting switches or going through corridors in very specific spots. But what's interesting about this is that you're not just trying to keep away from the mannequin that will chase you and kill you if you don't look at it. What you're trying to do is actually move the mannequins like out of their spots by strategically looking at them and then not looking at them. So you're kind of using them, you're kind of using the monster itself as a puzzle piece. So for example, in the very first room, what you're doing is you're trying to go through this little corridor, but it's blocked by mannequins. So you go out and you realize that the mannequin is following you. You're trying to lure it out of a little hallway. Once you understand that, what you're doing, trying to get the monster out of the way, then you can go through the hallway and you're good to go. And a lot of these puzzle rooms have something to that degree. You have a lot of mannequins that are all chasing you at certain times, right? And you have to strategically look at one and not the other. Sometimes you have ways you can control them with two different types of tools that you have. It feels really odd to have that kind of feeling where you're doing a puzzle, but in order to do the puzzle, you have to put yourself in this vulnerable position. You have to make yourself feel in danger. It was a really odd sensation for me. And so I was trying to understand what the identity of this game is. That's basically what it came down to. And I think the reason why is because, like I said, we have a puzzle and a horror. We have full control versus very limited control, and we're trying to shove those together. And it doesn't really feel like a horror game. It feels like a puzzle game that has horror aesthetics about it. I kept feeling like the vibe of this game wanted me to be scared. Like it wanted me to have this kind of strange horror kind of vibe. Not necessarily a scary game, but it definitely feels like the game is trying to be something more mysterious and more interesting than just a puzzle game. A lot of times when I'm trying to figure out what a game is trying to do mechanically, what that interaction is trying to do to the player, I usually imagine swapping the assets for something else completely to see if the vibe would change completely, right? So in this game, imagine instead of these creepy robot, mannequins, maybe you swapped them out for, Roblox people, right? And you played the game that way. Would it still be scary? And in some respect, yeah, I think it would. And I think it's because the mechanics themselves are creating some sort of tension. It reminds me of these TikTok videos that I've seen, and I'm not sure what the game is, but you're trying to run away from some sort of entity. Basically, that's a horror mechanic, right? You are running away. You have no power in this type of game. You're just trying to get away as fast as you can. But what's funny about these TikTok videos that I always see is that this monster is always replaced or modded with something else. Sometimes it's just a soundboard of like Michael Jackson, or it's a meme of some sort, or some sort of piece of music or something like that, and that's chasing you. And it's really funny to see something like that because there's this strange juxtaposition where it's a really funny thing, but it's creating horror still. It's still a scary situation. And that's interesting because that mechanic, that means that the thing that's happening, the thing that you're interacting with is the horror. That's still building a whole lot of tension. And it doesn't matter what that thing looks like. It just, the fact that it's chasing you and you can't get away from it, that's the horror part. So because of that, I would say that ZENOMATRIX definitely has a horror type of mechanic, a mechanic that does create tension. Interacting with the puzzle itself is increasing the tension. it's just kind of weird to me that it doesn't really seem to have any purpose. I don't really understand why this whole thing exists, which this does have a framing device, and I want to talk a little bit about that. What is a framing device? A framing device is a storytelling device. It's something that lets the audience know that what they're about to immerse themselves in is supposed to be read a specific way. And that's what the framing is for. So if you think about Portal, for example, if you were to take somebody without knowing what the narrative of Portal was and just, give them one of the maps without any type of storytelling going on, when they play the game, they might think, oh, that's an interesting type of puzzle, but I don't really understand the reason behind why I'm doing stuff. And it's because the framing device would be lost on them, right? The context that's needed to understand where they are. The framing device in this case would be the voice of Gladys, who is talking to you the whole time. The fact that the place that you're in looks like it's a study area with windows and stuff. The idea that you wake up from a cryogenic chamber, it seems like some sort of bed that you've been in for a long time, and that you're dressed kind of like an inmate. And so you're like a prisoner type of lab rat kind of thing. And that creates the framing for the rest of the games, for you to understand, oh, this is why I'm doing all these things. In ZENOMATRIX, there is a framing device in the very beginning. In the very beginning, you read this little message that teaches you basically how to control, but it also says that you're connected to the computer with some sort of biosensor. I'm not sure if it's yourself. I'm pretty sure it is. And it seems like you're studying some sort of entity in this system, but it's just in that little message in the beginning. And every time that you exit the game, then you're reminded, oh, right, I'm playing this on a desktop. This is something that I had a lot of trouble with in my game. My game is very similar to this, although my game is much worse than this. My game has this email that you receive, and then once you receive the email, then you log into this thing and you start doing a little bit of research before you go into a simulation, and you play through the simulation. But the weird thing about that game, when I did a lot of playtesting, is even though the game itself was meant to be confusing, it was meant to be confusing for a specific purpose. And almost no one understood why they were being confused. A lot of people just thought it was just a weird, confusing game and basically just didn't care to finish it. And in my mind, when I designed the game, I was thinking, oh, people will finish this pretty easily. And by the end, they'll understand what the context was about, and then they'll fit everything together and understand, oh, wow, that was the game. But it almost never worked out that way. I think the reason why people had a hard time connecting the two pieces, the framing device and the gameplay in my game, was because the framing device never interrupted their flow. It was never part of the gameplay. If you think about other games that have framing devices like Portal, right? Gladys comes in all the time and she's constantly saying stuff to you. Imagine if Portal was just Gladys, says something to you in the very beginning and then you beat her at the very end. That whole middle section would just feel like a puzzle game, and that's kind of it. There's a lot of environmental storytelling, of course, happening in there. The game that I'm just playing right now, called Forbidden Solitaire, it's not just some solitaire game about a wizard trying to find everlasting life. It's a CD-ROM game that you are playing while you're talking with a family member who is constantly telling you that this game is probably not something you should play. So with those games, those framing devices, they keep coming in. It's like they're part of the gameplay almost. So for me, when I'm playing this game, because I don't have that constant interruption, I'm not getting that kind of constant interpretation, that reinterpretation for me. All right, so that was my experience with this game. I'm now going to go ahead and read the developer's intentions to see what it was that they had wanted me to experience. So every game that is submitted to me, the developer fills out a questionnaire. This was my first question. It was, what were you hoping the player would feel while playing your game? This dev answered, I want the player to start out scared, then gradually learn to take control of things as they play more and more levels, and the fear is replaced with understanding, until the game throws them another curveball, of course. My second question was, why did you choose this experience? This dev answered, I grew up playing puzzle games. These are games racking your brain until you get to that eureka moment, is the main attraction. But puzzles do appear in other genres as well, like horror. And I'll be honest, I don't like the way that they're used. Even in AAA games like the Resident Evil series, or more AA stuff like Poppy Playtime, it feels borderline disrespectful. It's usually some variation of get chased by a monster, then do some arbitrary puzzle that barely connects to anything else, then repeat ad nauseum. I do understand why this is the case, though. Horror and puzzles are opposites by design. Horror relies on keeping the player in the dark, both thematically and literally, but also mechanically, as well as keeping the player powerless. You're usually in a dimly lit, unfamiliar place, not knowing if you're alone or not, or whether you have enough bullets, assuming you even have a gun, to fight whatever is lurking in the dark. After all, a horror game immediately loses its scare factor once you know how everything works, or you have enough control over the situation. Puzzles, on the other hand, are the exact opposite by design. They're required to communicate all the information the player would probably need in order for them to be solvable. Here's where you are, here's the exit, here's how everything works, and here's how to manipulate it. Good luck. This is why puzzles are usually regulated to either being time filters between chase sequences or as a distraction that you would have to do while being chased by a monster. Either way, there's always this wall that separates the two. ZENOMATRIX is a game design experiment to see if it was possible to marry the two in a more seamless experience. To paraphrase the game's very pretentious Steam description, what if the willing acquisition and relinquishment of information and control was both the main puzzle mechanic and the main horror element? What if the monster was both a threat to overcome but also a puzzle to be solved? But how would that work? Well, the general idea is to take something that can be a source of fear in horror games, then turn that into a resource you have to manage in order to solve puzzles. I've always been a fan of the weeping angel mechanic in horror games, those monsters that only move if you're not looking at them, usually a statue or a mannequin of some kind, something that isn't supposed to be able to move. Games like SCP Containment Breach made it popular with the SCP-173 monster, and now AAA games like Resident Evil, Shadows of Rose, and even Minecraft with its new monster, the Creaking, have started implementing this type of behavior. I always thought this kind of enemy had a lot of potential as it created interesting situations for the player to navigate, and the fact that the player had limited control over it made it even more interesting. I thought it was the perfect way to test this little design hypothesis by making a puzzle game where the horror monster is the main mechanic. Well, I just felt like I just watched a Games Over Qualia episode. My third question was, were there any specific moments, mechanics, or ideas that you built around that emotional goal? This dev answered, well, I can tell you that seamlessly combining horror and puzzles is not easy. You will have to slightly lean into one or the other. So you either end up focusing on puzzles while sacrificing some of the horror elements, or vice versa. The first level in the second world, 2-1, is my favorite level. It's so simple, but exemplifies exactly what I was going for in terms of gameplay. But I wouldn't exactly say it's scary, especially now that you've unlocked that gadget that lets you control the monsters even more. Then there's the end of the game. I don't know how far you got, but the red and final world of the game is a good example of the game leaning more into horror. Up until this point, the player had things figured out, so after understanding how to deal with the mannequins, the game mostly becomes a regular first-person puzzle game, and then you get to the red world, and now there's a new type of mannequin that you also can't move when you look at it. That sounds interesting. I have not gotten to that part. The puzzles in this final stretch of the game are honestly not that challenging, but this new mechanic flips things on the player, and for these last few levels, the game becomes more of a horror game than it was for most of its runtime. So is it possible to seamlessly combine puzzles and horror? Yes, but there's a bit of a trade-off between the two. I look forward to attempting this again in future games. This is my first game, so it's far from a perfect experience. Thanks for playing the game if you have. I really hope you enjoyed it. Well, thank you. Yes, I did enjoy this game quite a lot. And yeah, my goodness, you have put a lot of design thought into this, which is awesome. I thought it was really interesting, the points that you made, which is, it's really cool because you're thinking the exact same type of way that I was. I think it's perfectly fair to say that there's a lot of AAA games out there that are horror in genre, but they keep like this puzzle mechanic in there as kind of a secondary thing. It's just something that you kind of switch attention to as opposed to being a seamless integration of the two. And I think you're right. I think the reason why we lean one way or the other is because they are opposites, right? You can't usually have two things together. And I think your game in some ways kind of proves that, right? The game itself is not that scary because it's mostly a puzzle game, even though it does have this horror mechanic in here. And it's interesting to have that kind of tension in here, where you have games like Pools or Exit 8, where the horror isn't necessarily the execution of the thing that you're doing, but it's kind of the thing that you keep in the back of your mind. It's psychological, right? That psychological horror. Pools I've played a lot of, and it has that very, very thick, weird atmosphere that you're going through. And again, you have a puzzle. The puzzle is to get through the area, but you feel really weird about the whole thing because you feel like something's going to get you at some point, and you need to be very careful, it feels like. I found it interesting that you said your favorite level in your game was 2-1. When I was analyzing this game, 2-1 was the first level that I understood that things were not scary anymore, that it felt like it was less of a horror game and it's much more of a puzzle game. 2-1 to me, I think is brilliantly designed, and I think it's a great puzzle level. Whenever designers think of like complex kind of ideas that are shoved into like a very simple type of situation, a lot of designers call that elegant design. That's what I would say that level is. I'd say 2.1 is very elegantly designed. But my favorite was actually 4.6. In 4.6, it's called Ignorance is Bliss. There's only one mannequin and it can't see you. You're behind it. And there's 2 doors in front of it, and you interact with these doors to make sure that you blind the mannequin so that it never sees you whenever you are crossing in front of it, because once it does, then it starts following you, and it kind of messes everything up. Now, what was really fun about that level was trying to figure out what was happening, right? Because up until this point, I've been trying to make mannequins move in specific ways. So I thought that's what I had to do here also, but it turned out every time that the mannequin saw me, which is when it starts to follow me, that is actually the bad thing. That's actually when you failed the puzzle. You don't know that you failed it yet, especially in the beginning when you're just experimenting with the whole thing. But it's really interesting because the goal of the puzzle is to keep away from danger, which is also the goal of horror, right? To keep away from danger. So it felt like those 2 goals were aligned in that level. And it felt like what I was doing was the same in both genres. So if you play that level perfectly, you're never in danger, which is kind of what horror is about, right? If you play horror perfectly, you're never in danger. I myself am very drawn to narratives, so the idea that you had about this computer where you're interacting with the biosensor, that was really interesting to me, and I really wanted to follow up more into that, and I wanted to see more seamless integration, which is why I was talking about that whole framing device thing. I really like that idea. So it's interesting that you said that this is a game design experiment. It was probably never meant to be something completely cohesive, which is fine. I definitely want to see what more you have in store for this kind of stuff later on down the line. If you have more games in your mind, I would love to see those things. Before I did this episode, I talked a lot about this game previously with a Discord pal of mine in a podcast episode. It's for Patreon members. It's free for right now, so for anyone who wants to watch it, you can. That link is in the description. And if you want to support this channel, that would be amazing, because that's how these things get done. So that's very, very much appreciated. So thank you so much, Purple Moth, for submitting your game. If you're not this developer and you want to submit one, there's a link in the description. That's everything I have for you guys. I will talk to you later. Peace.